Good evening and welcome everybody to this great celebration of the democratic process. And with a month to go before the election, less than a month now, certainly all eyes are upon these races, and I can't think of a better way for us to come together in Michigan around the issues that matter with the candidates leading up to the election. So I want to say thank you very much to Attorney General Bill Schuette for joining us tonight. And the questions...
I am delighted to be here. I want to thank everybody for coming, the audience, and I want to thank everybody for coming, the audience and news organizations from MLive from across the state. So I'm excited to be here. This is a pretty cool, hip place. So it's... Can I see? Right there? Yeah. How am I doing?
I'll try it without the mic.
How's this work? Is this working now? Anyway, I'm excited to be here, and thanks for fiddling with me. All right. Okay.
All right, we're going to jump right in, Attorney General. And we'll start with an easy one, a general question for you. But what do you consider your top accomplishment of your first term as Attorney General?
How's this, live right here?
Yeah.
Oh, good, good. You know, I approach it this way. It's not about, you know, some epaulette or something you put on your shoulder. I've found that in my 4 years as Attorney General, if I'm on receive instead of broadcast, if I listen to what people's comments, if I listen to people's voices, I can make a huge difference in their lives. And for me, it's like Penny LaPierre, whose husband went in to get a shot for back pain and neck pain, and several months later died. And that's why I formed a commission on, or a grand jury to find the truth of what happened to this New England Compounding Center. And if you listen to the voices of meningitis like Penny, it's why it reinforces why I formed a grand jury to get to the bottom of that, and why I'm working with my federal partners in Boston, the U.S. attorneys, to try to get to the bottom of what happened and provide justice for victims of meningitis. Or it's these cops and firefighters in Detroit, you know, George Braxton or Roy Sales, or who talked about how their pensions were going up in smoke because of mismanagement of the Detroit pension system. And that's why I stood up for their pensions. Article 9, Section 24 says, pensions shall not be diminished or impaired. So it's people like that, or it's the Leslie King, who is a victim of human trafficking from here in West Michigan, when she describes to me the horror she went through, where young women against their, good afternoon, Leslie, where women against their will are forced into the sex slave market, human bondage and trafficking. That's why I formed a commission on human trafficking to provide additional protections for victims and tougher penalties for the Johns and the traffickers. Or it's making sure these rape kits, you know, listening to the challenges where these rape kits, which are, it's like 8.5 by 11, maybe 3 inches thick, John, that had evidence of a horrific crime of rape. And when, for years, these crimes were never investigated, the evidence box is on a shelf someplace in Detroit, but not anymore, not on my watch. I took $4 million from my department, applied it so that and required that these evidence boxes will be examined so we can make sure we do justice for women. Because women were violated twice. Once by a horrific crime, and then secondly, the crime was never investigated. The rapist never investigated or apprehended or prosecuted. Not anymore, not on my watch. So in answer to your question, it's about working with people, solving problems, and as Attorney General, I have this marvelous privilege and honor to represent people across the state, and it's all about Leslie's and Penny's and George, and that's really what makes this job rewarding.
Well, you have a number of things in motion coming out of the term, but are there any new top priorities for you, new initiatives that are high on your agenda for a second term?
Well, you know, that's a great question. In terms of the second term, and you know, I take nothing for granted. It's got 29 days before the election, so I'm pretty focused on that, and so I appreciate everybody coming here. But my second term agenda, and I'm confident that on election day I'll receive the trust and confidence of the majority of the voters in our state, and I want to make sure a couple of things. I want to implement the remaining recommendation on the Michigan Commission on Human Trafficking. Secondly, I want to make sure we examine all these DNA evidence boxes. We'll come to conclusion on the this whole issue with meningitis and providing justice to Penny. And when you meet, by the way, just parenthetically, if you ever meet with this meningitis support group, where you meet with people who's lost loved ones or going through this tortuous healing, again, it makes it very vivid, makes it very real. And so that's an important item for the second term, plus something called OK to Say, which is Michigan's school safety initiative, which was brought to me because I listened to the voice of a woman named Joe Spry, who's a superintendent in Cadillac, Michigan, who happened to be in Colorado during the tragedy of Columbine. And so she took the Colorado model of Safe to Tell, came to my office and some really thoughtful legislators and said, we need to have a Michigan school safety initiative. So we took the Colorado program, Michiganized it, and now we have a 24/7, 365 kind of warning system so that if a student or teacher, administrator learns that someone might commit an act of violence in a school or harm herself or himself, there's a way, if you go to your app, go OK to Say on your app, okay? And it'll show you the menu on how you can get to OK to Say. It's via text or an app or an email. And then when it comes to the Michigan State Police doing a terrific job, they'll alert the closest first responder. So making sure the school safety initiative is, soaked into the culture of schools across the state, working with the MEA, and there's a great example where you can get something done in a bipartisan fashion. People say you can't get anything done today in Michigan or America because there's this chasm of ideological differences. Well, we had Democrats, Republicans, the MEA, Bill Schuette, working together, teachers, administrators, to have put into place a school safety initiative, and that's I think that's a tremendous thing for children. And my wife and I, we understand when we would take our children by the hand when they first went to elementary school, or then you look out the driveway when they're driving to high school, and no matter whether they're young or they're old, you want your children to be safe in school, and that's what OK to Say is all about.
The last time you ran, and we actually had a discussion in Editorial board about this, you said the Attorney General had an obligation to fight against the Affordable Care Act, and with thousands of Michigan residents enrolled and no real clear traction politically on getting it repealed, do you think it's still worth the use of state resources to fight Obamacare?
Well, I happen to think Obamacare is a mess. It's not working. Remember those famous words, you can keep your health care plan if you want to? We know that didn't happen. And we see people losing their health care, their premiums going up, not being able to choose your doctor. And this is a prescription for national health care that just doesn't work. And the numbers who've signed up have been, I think, low. And most importantly, from my standpoint as Attorney General, I took an oath to defend the Constitution. And it wasn't a half an oath. It wasn't, discretionary, an optional exercise. Well, if it's too spicy, you stay away from it, like the jalapenos on some buffet. That's not what the Constitution is about. You don't get to pick and choose with discretion which provisions you'll enforce. And the fact is, there are 25, 6, 7 attorneys general across America who felt, as I did, that there were constitutional flaws. And the court ruled on that, the United States Supreme Court. There'll be more decisions in the future. But, I'm going to continue to stand up and speak out against Obamacare. And I think many, many, many citizens across this state and the United States of America agree with me.
Another very polarizing national issue that has, of course, ramifications here in Michigan is same-sex marriage. Nevada and New Jersey, both states with Republican governors, chose not to defend the ban on same-sex marriage. What makes the situation in Michigan different?
Well, actually, the decision to enforce the Constitution or not came from the attorneys general in the state of Nevada. From my standpoint, again, I took an oath to protect the Constitution and defend it. That's why I defended the pensions of cops and firefighters. I didn't waver from that. I took some heat about that, but you know what? These are cops and firefighters who worked hard in a tough city, in a tough job, and through no fault of their own, their pensions were maybe up in smoke. I stepped forward and defended that. I also defended the Natural Resource Trust Fund, where some legislators wanted to think of the Natural Resource Trust Fund as some piggy bank where they could use for, some legislative purpose. But that would have violated the will of the Michigan voters. I also took the admissions clause that we have, baked into our Constitution, where we say that it's wrong, fundamentally wrong, to treat people differently based on the color of your skin, or your race, or your gender, or your ethnicity. I took that, I defended our Michigan Constitution to the United States Supreme Court, and in April of this year, they affirmed our clause, our Constitution, and then with respect to the marriage issue, as I've said for some time now, the sooner the United States Supreme Court makes a decision on this, the better off everyone will be. And here's what I think we need to do in this state and in this land. We need to have discussion on all these controversial issues, social issues, cultural issues, whether it's marriage, abortion, guns, all these. We need to do this measured by the depth of our argument, not the shrillness of our voice. And we need to do it in a civil way. We need to be able to have this discussion, and we can agree to disagree, but we need to be civil about it. And so the United States Supreme Court chose not to take 7 cases up to date, and that's how the court operates. And now we're all waiting for the decision by the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, and that's where it is right now.
Yeah, and given that news today out of the Supreme Court that they won't hear these cases in their current, where they stand currently from the other states, if the Circuit Court of Appeals upholds the judge's ruling striking down Michigan's ban, would you still appeal to the Supreme Court?
I spent 6 years as a judge on the Michigan Court of Appeals, so I have some knowledge and experience how this system works. And after 6 years as a judge in the courtroom, after 4 years as Attorney General, I never prejudge what a court might do. No one would have assumed that the United States Supreme Court would not hear those cases. Many thought they would take them up. I'm going to see what happens by the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, and then I'll make a very prompt and thorough decision. So we'll see what happens there. But the point is, the sooner we get this decided in America, and I understand the process. That's why we have an independent judiciary. So I'm looking forward with expectation to a decision by the Sixth Circuit.
Some of your critics said that, with 30 states now essentially have legalized same-sex marriage because the Supreme Court's not going to hear these cases. And some of your critics have said that it's given the cultural shifts that are happening in society, and then also from a resource standpoint, there's a waste of resources to continue to fight these ideological kind of arguments and take them further. So let me just turn this at 1 degree here. So what factors are in play do you use to continue defending it when Michigan's law is considered unconstitutional?
Well, this all is a process, and frankly, we have great value from the women and men, the attorneys who work in the Department of Attorney General, really smart folks. And again, my job is to defend the Constitution, no matter what the provision might be. That's why I defended the pension clause to help cops and firefighters. That's why I defended the admissions clause, and the United States Supreme Court gave us a 6-2 affirmation of the Michigan Constitution. Some people thought that was controversial. Some people said, why are you defending the Natural Resource Trust Fund? Because, gee, some folks wanted to spend it on different projects. Well, the answer is it's in our Constitution. So you can't pick and choose. You can't have selective enforcement on which provision of the Constitution you'd like to defend or not. That's not how it works. And if you did that, if any one Attorney General kept doing that across this country, then that leads to chaos. That's anarchy. That's not democracy. If the voters of this state want to change the provision in our Constitution, I will defend that in every inch of my body. And I will honor and respect and defend any final decision made by the United States Supreme Court.
Would you support the expansion of the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act to include LGBT citizens?
Here's the recommendation. It's a great question. And and you hit it right on point. This is one of these issues that people across the state need to have this discussion and have this in a civil fashion. And let's not have shrillness of voices. Let's have the depth of our argument, the depth of our persuasion be the marker for this debate and discussion. I happen to think 2 things. One, nobody, and I mean nobody, should be discriminated against in employment, housing, or public accommodation. Nobody should be discriminated against. That's really so critical. And secondly, we need to also have a discussion and respect the religious institutions, churches, and people who have strong religious values. You know, this is the 21st century. Can't we do more than one thing at a time? I would say we could. We ought to have a discussion on that. It ought to be rational and ought to be respectful of people's differing views and try to see if we can have a result. And so I think that's one item that the legislature will work on, I would imagine, you know, maybe after the election, maybe in January. But we ought to have a discussion and try to talk it through.
One other national issue that you framed as a matter of upholding the law, and the top law being the Constitution, was immigration matters at a national level. At the time, it didn't seem Michigan had too much of a relevant threat from Canadian people coming over. But we have an issue now where we have Central American children who've been brought to Michigan, and there's been protests against them being here. So on the whole, a legal pathway to citizenship issue and other immigration matters, do you think it's still relevant right now for a potential second term to take involvement in those matters?
You know, I think we all have responsibility on these issues. You know, I go to graduations, meet with students, groups, you know, all sorts of different viewpoints. And we all have a stake on what our future is. You know, sometimes people say, well, it's the other girls, the other guys' responsibility. No way. We all have responsibility. We're the other guy. You're the other girl. We all need to engage in this debate. I think our communities and our states have greater vitality and more vibrancy and thoughtfulness. So we all need to get engaged on this. What bothers me is you know, my wife Cynthia and I, you know, we grew up in a little town in Midland. You know, get your map out. You guys all know how to do that, right? And we have 2 children. And what I really find very objectionable, the children are used as pawns in this immigration debate. I think that's wrong as a parent and a husband and a father. So the children should not be used as pawns in this. We need to secure our borders, and then we need to make sure that we have a law-abiding way for people to come into this country, because this is the land of hope and opportunity, but children should not be pawns in this immigration debate.
Moving on, do you support Michigan's current mandatory sentencing guidelines, and are you interested in exploring any tweaks to that system?
John's question involves prison sentences and guidelines, and how does this work? And a couple of points that I think are the underpinnings on this. We all need to realize that, unfortunately, and now things are getting better in this state through the leadership of our team, Governor Snyder, Lieutenant Governor Ruth Johnson, and the team we have in Lansing now. And we're going forward. We're not going backwards. But the thing we need to know is that if you go to prison today in the state of Michigan, you've caused bad acts. You may have, you know, had your 3rd or 4th felony, now you're in prison. And so the people in prison are folks who are bad characters for the most part. And you need to understand this also, that Michigan has the highest crime rate in the Midwest. We have 4 communities, tragically, that are on the top 10 homicide list in the United States of America: Detroit, Pontiac, Flint, and Saginaw. And so public safety is a key issue for me, and also it's in our Constitution. Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution says the government is provided for the security and protection of individuals. And I think what we need to do is drive down the cost of how we operate our prisons. And we need to do a better job of that. And we need to make sure that the bad guys are locked up. But then we need to make a distinction about nonviolent crimes and whether they should be moved from prison to the county jails. And that's the discussion we have to have. But I have to tell you, we cannot have, you know, if you really want to save money, you'd have no prisons in Michigan. Would that make sense? No. We need to operate our prisons more efficiently, drive down the costs, make sure that there are consequences for criminal, illegal, reprehensible behavior, and see if there are other ways we can save money on nonviolent criminals. That's a discussion worthy of having.
What is the proper role for the Attorney General to step in on local criminal investigations to bring those matters to court? And should it happen more or less?
Well, you know, it's all about a partnership. I received today the endorsement of 104 cops and prosecutors across the state of Michigan, and received this support and endorsement of the Detroit Police Officers Association, Fraternal Order of Police, the Police Officers Association of Michigan, deputy sheriffs, what have you. And so, you know, prosecutors and law enforcement and I, we're like peanut butter and jelly, and I really like peanut butter and jelly, my favorite sandwich. But the analogy I'm trying to make is we work together to provide safety in our streets, so that schools are places of learning, not violence, and so there's safety in our neighborhoods and streets and our communities. And so, you know, we work together. Sometimes if you're a smaller county, what my office does is provide assistance to prosecutors across the state of Michigan, and when they're taking their appeals, we would provide help on that. Just recently, I worked with the prosecutor in Kalamazoo County, who's a Democrat. And it means it's an example of bipartisanship, because people expect me to lead and solve problems and get things done. So Prosecutor Getting and I formed a cold case sexual assault unit working with federal prosecutors across this state, and we are going to be, we've arranged a guy coming from Memphis, Tennessee, that we think that we'll be able to solve a cold case in Kalamazoo. And so we work in partnership, like I'm doing with Kim Worthy, the prosecutor in Detroit, to make sure that we examine these DNA evidence boxes. So this is about teamwork, it's about partnership, and it's about being efficient, and it's about leadership. And that's what the state deserves. That's what we're providing today, and we're going to do that in the future too.
Several Michigan cities have decriminalized the possession of marijuana. Between that and medical marijuana, it's created some tensions, social and law enforcement tensions. Would you support a move to decriminalize possession of marijuana at a state level?
You know, this will be a decision that voters will make. And that's what this, you know, we have a system here, it's called democracy. And it's debate, it's discussion. And we've seen this happen in other states across America, John, where, you know, whether it's Colorado or Washington, what have you, have chose to legalize drugs, legalize marijuana. And I think in 2016, maybe that'll be on the ballot. And everybody here can choose, and people across the state can choose. And I think that's probably what will happen. There'll be a vote on it.
And where would you fall on that?
Well, we'll see what the initiative is. I don't think we should put more drugs in the hands of children. And I think their families have a lot of challenges now. Do we need to increase that with legalizing drugs? I don't think so. But you know what? Everybody's opinion will be counted. And this is an example where people have debate and discussion. That's what this is about. They did that in 1776. We ought to be able to do that in 2014.
Michigan doesn't have a law either permitting or prohibiting the open carry of firearms. And here in Grand Rapids and some other communities, it's created some tension, again, out in the streets, in public places. Is a law needed to clarify the open carry situation in Michigan? And if so, how permissive or restrictive should that law be?
Well, this is again, goes right back to the smack dab of the Constitution now, doesn't it? And so now you're talking about, we've talked about First Amendment, we've talked about now the Second Amendment, which really, in my opinion, says that, you know, it's fine and it's constitutional for someone to have a firearm for protection, defense, sporting, hunting purposes, a collection, what have you. And I'm a firm believer in that. I also work with law enforcement because they're on the front line. And, you know, the cops and the sheriffs, they occupy a special space. It's the space between chaos and order. That's what law enforcement does. And so I try to listen to both. We have, you know, certain laws right now in the books in terms of, you know, firearms and all of that. What I do in each one of these, I work with the legislature, listen and make an opinion. We'll see what happens on that.
In some of those situations, it seems like they were deliberately provocative. And again, it's a First Amendment. They've got a point of view. But from your law enforcement perspective, and you're talking to police chiefs and sheriffs, is there something about the social compact there of an orderly society that needs to be addressed either through ordinance or just through common sense on the streets?
You know, what's interesting is you use the word tension. And the founders did that on purpose. they built in these tensions on purpose. And you see it on firearms, you see it on speech, you see it on religious expression, and also the freedom from religion clause. And so the framers did this on purpose, and they had challenges with that. And again, 1776, we'll go through that now, and that's part of this discourse. But I always look to the Constitution first.
Two quick questions. We're running out of time.
None of his questions are quick. That's for sure.
How have you improved the administrative and other functions of your office since the time you've been in there? Obviously, you inherited a different culture when you got there, and you've brought your people in and your agenda. But how have you improved the functioning of your office?
Well, you know, I've served now as Attorney General for 4 years, and my calling is service. I'm an optimist to the core, and I have this huge privilege of serving as Attorney General. And the quality of the women and the quality of men, the attorneys, the professionals, the folks who work at Michigan's largest law firm, is really, I'm real proud to be associated with them. And you know, we do more with less now. There's a new culture in the 21st century that you need to do more for less. You need to make sure that you're responsive to the taxpayers, customers, and we've put that new culture in place. I think we have can-do attorneys where we want to get to yes, because I think in the older model, getting to yes was too risky. But now we want to solve problems and go forward. That's the governor feels that way. I feel that way, and so does our team. So we put into approach that let's solve problems. Let's not be afraid of risk, and make sure that we hold the taxpayers, who are the payers, the person in whom they place their trust in me to perform my job as Attorney General to the best of my ability. I do that very seriously.
You've had a number of jobs in public service. What have you learned from this job?
It's a great question. I've had this privilege of serving in all 3 branches of government as a judge for 6 years and Attorney General. And the most important thing, this is all about relationships. It's trying to understand others, putting yourself in the other person's shoes. But most of all, what I've learned is listen. Be on receive instead of broadcast. And if I'm on receive instead of broadcast, I can learn a lot, I can solve problems, and that's what the Commission on Human Trafficking is all about. It's all about making sure these DNA evidence boxes are examined to provide justice for the victims of rape. Women who've been violated twice. Once they're a horrific crime, and second, the crime was never solved. We're changing that now. And the School Safety Initiative, listening to people. So listening and building those relationships, to me, is the most important thing in any responsibility. And you know, every day is different for me. No one day is the same, and that's I find that challenging intellectually, but it's a huge privilege to serve as Attorney General.
Well, thank you very much for coming tonight to take our questions. And ladies and gentlemen, Attorney General Bill Schuette.
I had a good time.